Welcome to Convos from the Couch by LifeStance Health, where each episode covers the many facets of mental health and well-being. Hello, everyone. I'm Nicholette Lianza, and on this episode of The Couch and the Screen, I'm joined by my amazing colleagues, Angel Kramer.
Hello.
And Laura McClure.
Hello.
And we'll be talking with Dr. Anisha Patel Dunn about the Netflix documentary film Stutz. So welcome, Dr. Patel Dunn. Great to have you on.
Good morning. Hello.
Stutz is a documentary film directed by Jonah Hill that chronicles the life and career of his psychiatrist, Dr. Phil Stutz. So looking forward to see what we all thought about the documentary. So jumping in, what did we all think about it? Dr. Patel Dunn, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I think about this as sort of epitomizing, I think, what the movement we're seeing in the media over the past few years of really trying to bring what happens in the room to sort of everybody, all Americans. And I think about where I think the fundamental message that I get from that is really supporting the destigmatization of people getting treatment for mental health. And so overall, I was really happy to watch the movie and see the movie. I think as you break it down, and I know we're going to talk about that, there are some things that, I would not necessarily promote. However, I do think overall I would, if I had to say, I was really glad that this documentary, did come out, because I do think it really just puts a lot of layers to what's actually happening in treatment for people. And I really appreciated the vulnerability that was shown in the film.
Yeah, definitely lots of vulnerability shown, for sure. And who can disagree with anything that helps destigmatize mental health and therapy, right? That's a big piece right there. Angel, what did you think?
Yeah, I was a little lukewarm in regards to it. I appreciate the destigmatization of therapy and showing what's happening kind of behind the scenes and what happens when we close our office door and making it feel a little less scary. But the flow of the documentary itself really didn't maintain my attention all that well. And there was just enough about it that was a little icky that kind of disconnected me from it.
Okay, fair point. Laura, what about you?
Yeah, I would say I will preface this with I was unable to take an unbiased look at this. I was really unable to watch it from a clinician hat on. I did not like the movie. I think had it been made by anyone other than Jonah Hill or someone who has a lot of problematic abusive tendencies. I don't know if anybody else has read those really problematic texts between him and his girlfriend, but anytime he talked about all this work that he's done, I was just like, no, you haven't. And I couldn't take that lens off. And so I would preface that my dislike of this comes from a biased perception. I think also I had some issues with some of the ideas that Phil Stutz presented with not really giving ownership from where the ideas originated and how he has taken them and given them his own language so that they make sense and aren't clinical to his clients. I think I saw a lot of like what I would call in the way that he talked about them, kind of like stolen ideas. Like, I think when he was talking about the shadow man, I'm like, well, this is parts work. This is IFS, and this has been around for quite some time. You are just explaining it in a different way. You're using different terminology of what you're calling this part. I will say on a positive note, I'll end it on a positive note. I think that this film is really great, and I'm glad it was made because I think there's a whole generation of white men who will see this and identify with it, and it will destigmatize mental health for that population. And I am very thankful for that. There we go. I put a little mental health therapist hat on at the end of that.
Very, very good. And I find that I'm agreeing with all aspects of what, Dr. Patel, Dunn, Laura, and Angel, you're all saying. I too, putting on that therapist hat, found myself cringing watching some parts of it. And Angel, I know you mentioned maybe it didn't keep your interest. Kind of same here. I think the first, I would say 3/4 of it, I was just like, okay, does this pick up? Where are we going? And then definitely towards the end, it definitely picked up a bit. And we'll talk more about the therapeutic relationship. I mean, these two men are very close, and I love that was depicting that, like giving men permission to show this kind of emotion and have this kind of intimacy. So I love that. Jonah Hill, I was aware of some problematic texts and kind of, I think that all came out after Stutz came out. Stutz came out, I think, in 2022. So I think this came out after. And I was kind of thinking of that, like, okay, you're saying you did all this work, but I'm like, okay, don't throw stones at point, I wouldn't necessarily be so harsh on one of my own clients who would be continuing, let's work on it. But, with him kind of saying it like, yeah, I did all this work, and he's out there in the spotlight, it makes it easier for him to be a little bit of a target with that. He did do a quote early in the movie. I'm going to quote him here. I'm making this movie because I want to give therapy and the tools I've learned in therapy to as many people as possible through a film. I got to respect that. And that is what he did for sure. So what are our thoughts about the therapeutic relationship between Phil Stutz and Jonah Hill? Dr. Patel Dunn, what do you think about their relationship?
I think about early on in my training, one of my mentors talked about loving your patient, like the love that this, and that when I think about what resonated there, and that's always stuck with me over the years, as we all have worked with some difficult people, I'm sure, in our careers, whom you don't necessarily, that would not be the first emotion that would come to mind. But I do think as we train and over the years, as we see, the work we do, there is a compassion that comes from, I think, us as the clinician towards our patients. And in this movie, that love, that bond, that compassion is really depicted quite well. You can see it in their body language and the way that they interact with one another. And, although I do think, does their relationship in this film kind of negate their own relationship? And did this film kind of, for the greater good of the population, maybe it impacts that relationship between the two of them, but really to show what can be done or what is done in sort of the therapeutic relationship and therapeutic alliance. And so I think in that way, really just it sort of amplifies and magnifies what is, I think, what we all try to recreate in our therapeutic relationship in the room.
The power of that relationship,
Yeah.
and the intimacy that will go with it too. I hear you, definitely. Angel?
Yeah. I really appreciated seeing the therapist be so human and showing that empathy and that care can and is a two-way street. Whether it's from the therapist perspective, forgetting that, our clients care about us too. Maybe not all of them. Some of them are just coming to work on what they're wanting to work on, and then they go on their way. That's fantastic. But then there's some of us who might work with more long-term clients, and they really do develop that care for us, and we develop that care for them also. Just saying that out loud, I can think of several people who are on my caseload, have been on my caseload, that I would absolutely say that I care for on a human level, even outside of the therapeutic relationship, because we've worked together for so long, and it is only human to create that bond. So towards the end of the film, while it felt really icky for them to say "I love you" to one another, part of me was like, oh, we do love our clients and they do love us, even if it feels a little icky to put that word on it in such a poignant way. So I really appreciated that, and I appreciated how authentic they were with one another, how they joked with one another and kind of threw things out there. Like Stutz made an inappropriate comment about Jonah's mom at one point in time, and I cackled because I can think of some clients who would make that joke in our sessions, and it's completely fine. It is safe in those walls to have that openness and that authenticity, and I really enjoyed seeing that part.
Laura?
Yeah. I will say that I definitely agree in like the boundary crossing. I think especially you see that multiple times when Jonah's like, "Oh no, we're not here to talk about my issues. I'm doing a movie on you." And then it was like he was like, "Oh, do I get more therapy sessions with you?" And I thought, this is a beautiful relationship. And I'm not sure that there's any place to judge what a therapeutic relationship looks like in terms of what kind of jokes are told, because each person is different. And what we know is it's the client's perception of that relationship that is one of the big drivers of progress being made. So I wouldn't want to judge that. But what I would want to say is this looks like a relationship that at this point should be terminated in that professional manner, because once the client is taken over is like asking you the questions,
Mhm,
I think you have lost the dynamic that makes the relationship build progress. Because now we've crossed a dynamic into more friends. We share
yeah.
vulnerability with each other. And I think that that can have long-term damage on the relationship after that. That would be my take on it. But I think prior to this, it was probably a beautiful relationship that is indicative of high levels of progress and motivation for the client. But I
Mhm.
think at that point, I would be terminating that professional relationship.
Fair point. Fair point. And I think, we've each talked about kind of some of those boundary issues that we saw. Even I agree. I wonder if it was terminated as they were filming, because isn't that a conflict of interest there? If you're doing a movie on your psychiatrist, are you
It's
then
definitely a
making
dual
right,
relationship. And then also
right,
your therapist has a monetary like
right.
interest in this now too.
Right, right. So there's some wonkiness there. I also had the thought of like, because there was such bond of I mean, there's definitely a mutual, like, reciprocal vulnerability they both shared. Right. I really did like that. I think it does make you think as a therapist, what is appropriate to share? What is appropriate to self disclose? I think, anytime we're really measured about, okay, is this for the client that I'm sharing this, or is this more for me? I think there's a lot of that just as therapists we're trying to sort through. But I do think that there's just that I have very much fond affection for some of my own clients I worked with forever. I would just be really hesitant to use the "I love you" words. Just that's just me. And I kept thinking about Phil Stutz. Is there another one of his clients that were like, Phil Stutz never told me he loved me. He doesn't like me as much as he likes Jonah Hill. So there was some poor there, the client out there being like, dang, I don't get that kind of treatment from Phil Stutz. Geez. So, and that's a little silly to think, but I'm sure there's probably some client out there thinking that. So, okay. So, what did we think about Phil Stutch's approach to therapy and his various teachings? I know, Laura, you mentioned a little bit about some of that before, about how you felt like he maybe kind of borrowed or even stole some of those. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I would think, well, that's what therapy is. We are using other people's evidence-based research and their ideas. That's what I do as a therapist. I didn't invent CPT or
Hmm.
TFCBT, and some of the things that I might say, I will always, when I'm talking about like, oh, the maze, or, and I've coined something like this, I'll be like, this is how I describe it. The idea comes from internal family systems or whatnot. And then I use my own language. And I think for me, that's the part that was missing for me is like, well, I'm seeing all these techniques, but what I'm hearing you say is I developed, I came up with, I created. And for me, well, you didn't really. You created the language to explain it in a way that your clients can understand. And I think for me, the interventions are fine. I think it's what we all do, different phrasing, different things like that. And I think the way that it was like spread out over time maybe gives like I don't know. But again, I am somebody that's like a CBT, CPT, TFCBT. I use some pretty strict modalities and I mostly do trauma work. And so for me, I'm like, well, that doesn't really, that feels like you're pulling from here and pulling from there. And it felt more of, what is that word that they call it when you're not really using like a model? You guys know what that word is?
Eclectic?
Eclectic. Yes, it felt much more like an eclectic therapy, which
Mhm.
kind of goes against anything and everything that I was taught within my graduate program. So I think for me, those are my thoughts on it. I don't think it's neither here nor there. I think the interventions are good. They're things we all use all the time. I would just be careful about how we're presenting them on a big platform like that.
Angel?
I agree with Laura. In our own office space, I think it would be different for us to not necessarily acknowledge the modality that we're pulling something from, because most of our clients aren't going to know where it's coming from or need to know who did the research and stuff like that. But on this kind of platform, to present that information as, this is Phil Stutz' approach, this is his modality, that might be a little inaccurate and a little misleading to a certain point. Another part of his approach that kind of set off some red flags for me was, I believe it was towards the beginning of the documentary, when he said something along the lines of, you just need to listen to what I'm telling you and do it because I can make you feel better. I can't make anyone feel
Right,
better.
right,
But I can
right.
sit with you in the darkness until we start to see a light.
Mhm.
What I did like in his approach was drawing on the post-it notes. As soon as
Yeah.
I saw him draw, I'm like, I wish I could write and talk at the same time, because I would totally incorporate that into my session. Just like, here, take this with you. But I cannot write and talk at the same time, let alone draw and talk at the same time.
No, I thought too that was a great idea, the Post-it notes, for sure. Dr. Patel Dunn, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Yeah. So I took it from I didn't hear it. And so I think maybe I wasn't listening as acutely as you have, maybe Laura, even in him saying this was mine. I think I took it thinking about, all of us trying to meet our patients where they're at, and everyone is different. And so I think I'd left the documentary thinking that probably impacted so many people, but for different reasons, because in his approach and his different approaches and all that he kind of walked through, I think it one thing may have resonated with one person and a different thing may have resonated with someone else. And so I just think about, in this, confined, very thoughtful, I do think probably a lot of thought went into the making of this documentary. Yeah. And so the reiteration that if the intent was really trying to touch lives of people, and I hope the intent of just getting more people to be vulnerable and access mental health care, I thought his utilization of, and maybe in my mind, I'm like, oh, that's from here. And oh, he's taking that from here, is sort of thinking about, just meeting patients where they are. And so, with that in particular, I think he was probably trying to put together how he, over his career, meets people where they are in different ways and styles. And so I actually really appreciated him being so vocal and sharing so much, because I imagine with the length of his career, how many different people and different, places he has worked in helping people, right? I think he started his career early on, was in the, forensic system, and just sort of trying to figure out how to navigate that. And then, being in Los Angeles, of course.
Right, right. Definitely in LA too. So I again, commenting now after I hear each of you, I might start off with one thought, but then as I hear you guys, I'm like, okay, good point, good point. Again, for someone to watch this and to take what they're going to take from it, right? Someone who might have never been through therapy before and looks at it like, oh, is that what therapy could be? Oh, I like that. I mean, that's immeasurable right there. That's awesome. But then it also being depicted as like, okay, that's therapy, but there's some confines that needs to still be around there. I'm still kind of getting stuck on that part, but I think his tools are good. I like the sticky note stuff. I am someone though, when I'm presenting something to any of my clients, I will say, hey, this is CBT, or hey, this is this, that. I am really clear. I'll cite where I'm getting it from, because part of it I'm thinking is like, hey, go check this out too. Go do your own research in that. And I am very eclectic, right? Who said they were trained that? Oh, okay, Laura, you're like, we're not. And it's funny because I was trained eclectic. I preach eclectic. I'm like, open up that tool bag and let's see which one fits the best, and meeting them where they're at and stuff like that. So no, that's all interesting. I think he had some good tools. I was like Googling that. I mean, lots of social media and all that repost a lot of his teachings and stuff like that. So I'm sure it helped a lot of people as well. So other side note, did anyone think it was weird that Jonah Hill had to wear that wig? Sorry, that has nothing to do with anything, but did he really need to keep that consistency? It just seemed weird. I'm like, just keep it off, Jonah. It just looks silly.
Yeah, like once he pulled it up, why did you put it back on?
Right. You just didn't have to.
The gig is up.
So, alrighty. This is a great conversation. I'm glad we all can come to the table and talk about this. And even if we had some difference in opinion, I think there's some things we also kind of met in the middle with as well. So thank you, Dr. Patel Dunn, for joining us. And I'm sure we'd love to have you on again sometime.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was lovely.
I'd also like to thank the team behind the podcast, Jason Clayton, Juliana Whitten, and Chris Kelman, with a special thanks to Jason Clayton, who edits our episodes. Thank you for listening to Converse from the Couch. Take care, everyone.